Today, we're going to go deep inside one of the most high-stakes jobs in all of engineering, how you repair a high-pressure gas pipeline while it's still live. We're pulling back the curtain on the hidden science that welders and engineers are fighting every single day to stop a potential catastrophe.
I mean, that's the big question, right? It sounds pretty much impossible, doesn't it? Shutting down a major pipeline can cost millions and cut off energy for thousands of people. So instead, engineers perform this incredibly delicate high-wire act. The question is, how do they possibly pull it off safely?
All right, let's start with the procedure itself. We are talking about a job where the margin for error isn't just small, it's practically non-existent.
So this whole procedure has a name. It's called a hot tap. It's what allows crews to make repairs or even add new connections to a live pipe. It's absolutely essential, it's efficient, but boy, is it dangerous.
The number one fear, the absolute nightmare scenario, is something called burn-through. This is where the intense heat from the weld literally punches a hole straight through the pipe wall, unleashing a torrent of high-pressure, highly flammable gas. The consequences? Well, they would be absolutely devastating for the welders, for the environment, for everything.
So to prevent this, engineers basically had to become detectives. They had to identify the invisible enemies working against them inside the steel. And the first culprit? Well, it's a famous troublemaker in the world of welding.
It's called Hydrogen Induced Cracking, or HIC for short. So what's that? Essentially, you have these tiny, sneaky hydrogen atoms that manage to wiggle their way deep into the steel structure. And once they're in there, they make the normally strong, tough metal incredibly brittle, almost like glass, just waiting to fracture under the massive stress of the weld. And this isn't just a theory, not at all. Look at this micrograph. You can actually see these tiny cracks spreading like veins through the steel, right underneath the weld. This is the physical proof of what's happening on that microscopic level. Now, what's really fascinating here is that these cracks can't just form whenever they want. It takes a perfect storm. You need three things to happen all at once. You need a lot of hydrogen, you need a type of steel structure that's vulnerable to it, and you need high levels of stress trying to pull that metal apart. If you can get rid of just one of those things, you can stop the disaster before it starts. But hydrogen, as bad as it is, isn't the only enemy here. When you're welding on a live natural gas pipeline, there's another, way more complicated threat that's actually coming from inside the pipe itself. Yeah, you heard that right. The very gas that the pipe is designed to transport becomes an active saboteur. It starts waging a chemical war on the steel, from the inside out. So here's what's going on. The extreme heat from that welding torch travels right through the steel to the inner wall. That heat is so intense, it literally breaks down the natural gas, which is mostly methane, CH4, into its basic parts, hydrogen, which we already know is bad news, and carbon. And this free carbon then starts to soak into the inner surface of the pipe, a process they call carburization.
So why is adding a little extra carbon such a huge problem? Okay, this diagram looks really complicated, I get it. But it tells you one super important thing. As you add more carbon to iron, that's the line on the bottom, the temperature needed to actually melt it, which is on the left, drops like a rock. And that brings us to the real kicker. Normal steel melts at around 1500 degrees Celsius, but with all that extra carbon getting infused into the inner wall, a thin layer of the steel can now turn to liquid at just 1147 degrees Celsius. All of a sudden, you've got this thin, soupy, melted layer on the inside of a pipe that's holding back enormous pressure. That is the direct path to burn-through.
So, how in the world do you fight invisible enemies at thousands of degrees on a microscopic level? Well, you build a virtual battlefield. You simulate every last bit of the physics.
This is where this amazing tool called Computational Weld Mechanics, or CWM, comes into play. You can think of it like a super-powered computer model that lets engineers play out the entire welding scenario, second by second, before anyone even strikes an arc.
To do this, they build a digital twin of the pipe, which is what you're looking at here. It's called a finite element method mesh. It basically breaks the really complex shape of the pipe and weld into millions of simple, manageable little pieces. It's like a digital crash test dummy, but for metallurgy. And it lets the computer calculate all the forces at play in every single one of those tiny blocks. And when I say everything, I mean everything. The simulation calculates the flow of heat, the immense stress from the gas pressure, how the pipe wall actually thins out and stretches, the growth of that dangerous carbon layer, and even the movement of individual hydrogen atoms. It is a complete forensic investigation of the weld before it even happens. But okay, look, a simulation is only as good as its real-world predictions, right? So does it actually work? Let's look at the ultimate test, putting the virtual model up against actual physical experiments.
So researchers ran a series of real-world test welds. You had weld H on a thicker pipe, and it was perfectly safe. Weld J was marginal. It was getting close to failure. And then there was weld E on the thinnest pipe. That one resulted in a complete, catastrophic burn-through. These are our real-world benchmarks.
So what did the computer say would happen? The analysis showed that under all that combined heat and pressure, the steel would actually start to slowly flow. It's a process called creep, and it would form a dangerous groove right underneath the weld. This makes the pipe wall even thinner, exactly where it's already the hottest and the weakest.
And here it is, the moment of truth. The researchers concluded, and I'm quoting directly here, the analysis shows significant thinning exactly in those welds that burn through. The bottom line, the virtual model didn't just work, it perfectly predicted which welds would fail and which would hold. The digital crash test was a massive success.
So this is all fascinating science, but what does it all mean for the people who actually have to go out in the field and perform these incredibly dangerous repairs? The crucial point is this: this science saves lives. Period. By running these simulations, engineers can test dozens of variables: welding speed, temperature, pipe thickness, you name it, all safely inside a computer. They can design a safe procedure from the ground up so that when a welder finally steps up to that pipeline, that invisible battle inside the steel has already been won. It really makes you think, doesn't it? We've just explored this hidden battle of physics and chemistry going on all around us, and it leaves you with a final question. What other invisible forces, stress, fatigue, corrosion, heat, are engineers quietly fighting every single day just to keep our entire world running?